All right, Bloomberg's Lizzie is on Capitol Hill with Barney Frank, the congressman at the center of the financial overhaul in the House. Lizzie, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, Chairman of the Financial Services Committee, Barney Frank, who floor managed this bill, extensive days of debate. I want to ask you, one of the things we saw in the past few days was a few big changes, concessions, if you will, on a couple aspects of this bill. Do you feel like the Democrats bent to industry on the derivatives aspect of this and on preemption of state consumer protection laws?
No, not in either case. On preemption, very little happened. The bill said going into the floor that you could preempt a state law if it significantly interfered with the business of national banking. What was added was the phrase, or if it materially impairs the business. I don't think there's any difference. I think, frankly, that was almost a face saver for some people. There was an effort to try and give field preemption, that is, to allow the national regulator not just to cancel this or that state law, but to say the whole area was off limits. That did not happen. So I do not think many lawyers would find that there's a great difference between materially impair and significantly interfere. I think that's a typical kind of lawyers, rude and lascivious, saying it twice instead of once. There was a small dent on the derivatives. We have agreed all along that end users, people who are legitimately using derivatives to hedge a commercial risk, should get an exemption. We did have a narrowing, a broadening of the exemption, where we say that you would lose the exemption if you were putting counterparties at risk. The amendment that was adopted that I objected to said you lose the exemption if you're putting counterparties at risk in a systemically damaging way. So it's not a huge difference. I regretted it, but it left the framework basically in case. And on preemption, I don't think there was any substantive change at all.
How do you make sure, though, that a swap dealer isn't overcharging their client, an end user, because banks are making a lot of money on the bid-ask spread without regulation before?
Well, two things. First of all, we have put in the hands of the end user the ability to put it on an exchange. Now, some of the end users have said, well, we're worried about the exchanges. And there were some who said, make them go on an exchange, the end user. The end user said, please don't act in my best interest against my wishes. But they all have the right to do that. So end users who are worried about not being appropriately treated by a counterparty can put it on the exchange. Secondly, even where it's not on an exchange, there will be new, as a result of this bill, if it becomes law, much more price transparency. So people will be able to compare what others are charging. So even in the case where they don't want to go on an exchange, the end users will be given a lot more information about what the appropriate price would be.
Well, let's talk about this $150 billion fund paid for by the industry to wind down a failed firm. What do you do if the costs of dismantling a firm exceed $150 billion?
You would then have to go back to Congress and make the case that there were systemic problems that were coming and ask Congress to vote the money. It is clear in the bill that the money cannot go to the firm that's failing. Yeah. It can only go to deal with the systemic consequences of failure. Well, we do allow a $50 billion loan by the federal government treasury to the fund if it is made clear how it's going to be paid back by the assessment. But if in the end you don't have enough money, then Congress have to vote it. I will say this.
It's a tough sell in this climate.
Well, it's called democracy in the Constitution. I also don't think we'll be in this climate. That's a very good point you make. We are in a crisis now because the financial community screwed up. But a future crisis is not likely to be because of that. By the way, the main thing we've done is to put rules in place that make it much less likely that these large institutions will fail. And as the years go by, we may have a couple that are in trouble now, but it'll work itself out. If there were to be a crisis caused not by irresponsibility within our own financial community, but by some exogenous events, a liquidity crisis in Asia, as in the 90s, or some other external problem, you would then see, I think, the Congress much more willing to provide the funding. In other words, the problem we had this time was people were being asked to provide funding that partially benefited the very people who were guilty. If you don't have that element in the future, it'll be easier.
Well, let me ask you about the Senate. You all have passed a bill. They don't even have a coherent bill or agreement among Democrats.
True, but they are working hard on it. Look, a month ago you would have said the same thing about health care, but they're getting there. The Senate's a difficult place to work. I regret the fact that we have this de facto amendment to the Constitution where everything now takes 60 votes in the Senate. But I do know that Senator Dodd's working very diligently with some others, and I think we have the advantage where I think the Senate Republicans are a little less ideologically rigid than the House Republicans, so I'm somewhat optimistic.
Let me ask you one last question. Goldman Sachs changed its bonus and compensation structure. Should other Wall Street firms follow suit?
Yes, that's why we put this in the law. If we pass the bill that we passed today into law, they will be mandated to adopt compensation schemes that avoid the perverse incentive. They will not be allowed to have compensation schemes that say to people, take a risk, and if the risk pays off, you make a lot of money, and if the risk blows up, don't worry about it, because that encourages too much risk. So, yeah, that's what we're going to mandate there.
All right, Chairman Frank, thank you very much. Congratulations. It's Chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Barney Frank. Matt, Carol, I'm sending it back to you guys in New York.